Morning. Before I begin chapter 44 and end our novel, a few things to go over. Um, Misha did survive World War II. He did survive the ghetto. He did survive the Holocaust. We can infer, based on the little message that Jerry Spinelli sent us about the mouse being eaten and the shoe being thrown into the fire, I think he was trying to tell us that Janina did not make it, we think. Misha did. Um, but because of everything that he has seen over the last couple of years, he suffers up here. He has seen a lot of grotesque, traumatic things, and he definitely suffers from PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder. Kind of like Bufo, who wasn't right in the head. Misha is kind of in the same boat. Chapter 44. The world was returning to normal, but for me, there was no normal to return to. Normal for me was stealing bread and drinking ditch water. Little by little, I learned about things such as forks and money and toothpaste and toilets. And back in the countryside, I did what I did best. I stole things. I stole everything. I snatched everything I could carry, and I became my own donkey. I pulled a little cart everywhere I went, and wherever I stopped, I sold things like a carnival. I was so good at stealing that people would see things in my cart that they found nowhere else, and my prices were cheap. What did I know about prices? By the end of the day, my pocket was only a little bit less empty than my wagon. Side note, he's probably about 16, 17 years old here at this point. We're in the late 1940s. But who cared? Because I had discovered something. I had discovered my voice. I became a huckster. That's somebody who sold things on the street. Just like the ones that had fascinated me with bread for sale, apple for sale, shoes, cigarettes, ladies' underwear, come and see. Amazing bargains. I became just like them. For me, it wasn't about the selling. It was about the talking. There had been a few word bursts during and before the ghetto. But up until the end of the war, I probably had not spoken 2,000 words in my whole life. Now you couldn't shut me up. If my cart was empty, I would keep on selling, keep on hawking just to hear myself talk. I wallowed in words. There was no end to my words. They were free for the taking. Nobody ever chased me down a road yelling, "Stop thief, you stole my word!" Time went by. I talked enough, I stole enough, and I sold enough to buy a steamship ticket. And I joined the multitudes, the thousands that were going to America. The immigration officer said to me, "What's your name?" "Misha Milgram," I said. "Huh? What's a Misha?" He said, "Nah, your name is Jack." And I became Jack Milgram. I learned how to speak English. But I went on talking. And in America, when you talk, that means I was a salesman. Nobody hired me to sell the best products. The problem, you see, was my size, because I had stopped growing at 5 feet 1 inch. And I had a heavy Polish accent, and I was missing an ear, which now looked like a clump of cauliflower on the side of my head. I don't blame them. Who was going to let such a galoot like me in their door to sell something? "Good day, madame. Can I interest you in a nice vacuum cleaner?" "Nah, forget it." And then I got my big break. I was hired to sell a miracle vegetable chopper on the boardwalk in Atlantic City, New Jersey. I was given a table and a pile of cucumbers, and at 10 o'clock in the morning, people gathered in front of my table, and I began describing the wonders of the miracle chopper. And somebody called out, "What'd you do? Chop your ear off?" And before I was halfway through my spiel about the miracle chopper, the last person walked away, and I felt desperate. "Wait!" I called out, and my mouth took over. "There's something I gotta tell you. Dr. Korchak was right. There was a cow, and it burned like a marshmallow." The people stopped and turned, and they were thinking, "What is he talking about? What does that have to do with the miracle chopper?" Who cared, as long as I was talking? And Himmler looked like my Uncle Shepsel, and my Uncle Shepsel looked like a chicken. Do you want to know what rat tastes like? Rat tastes just like mouse. And I'm going to warn you one last time. Do not take the horse from the merry-go-round. As you can see clearly, Jack is a little bit disturbed in the head. I told the people walking by, I told them everything. Except about Janina. I told them all that I had seen. I told them all that I was. And the boardwalkers streamed by in both directions. They stopped to listen, 3 or 4 of them. Miracle Chopper sold 0. I was fired at the end of the day. Oh, but I had found something. And the next day, I was back on the boardwalk. No cucumbers, no choppers. It was just me, and I was standing near the steel pier, and I was spouting off at the mouth. And then one day, I took the bus west to a city called Philadelphia. To earn money for cheap beds and cheap places, I would hand out flyers, and I would sweep out gas stations, and I would shuck oysters. No, but my real job, right here, running my mouth. If you walked the streets of Philadelphia back in those days, oh, you probably heard me. And you turned around, and as soon as you realized I was spouting nonsense, you probably turned away and you walked on muttering to your friend, "Ah, there goes another fruitcake. What a nut job, huh?" It was on a street corner in Philadelphia that I met my wife. It was on 13th and Market Street. It was a cold day in November. And she stopped and she listened. Well, that was rare enough. And 5 minutes later, she was still there listening to me spout off at the mouth. That was unheard of. Nobody ever stayed that long. And then she left. But she came back with a bag of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor. And she offered me one. Her name was Vivian. She came back every day, and she stayed longer and longer, bringing me hot chestnuts. She lured me away from the street corners. She took me to lunch at a place called Horn and Hardheart. We went for walks in Rittenhouse Square. We played card games in her ground floor apartment. Always, I went on talking. I would tell my stories. And Vivian became my street corner. See, Vivian was a normal, sensible person. But I think at that time, she must have gone a little bit cuckoo too. Maybe my words dazzled her. Maybe she saw me as a needy refugee from the war. Or maybe she saw me as an exotic artifact of history. In any case, one day out of the blue, she blurted out, "Okay, I'll marry you." And I thought to myself, did I ask? Well, the marriage only lasted for 5 months. Vivian quickly found out that living with me was much different and playing cards with me. When Christmas carolers came to the door at Christmas time, I slammed the door in their face. When I saw a copy of the book Hansel and Gretel in a bookstore window, oh, I went right in there and I grabbed it and I ripped it to shreds. And Vivian had to pay for it. In the shower, sometimes, I would turn on the cold water, but I could never stand it long enough till I became blue. I stole apples from fruit stands. I always did strange things at parades. I laughed at the wrong places, at things that weren't funny. I heard voices. I heard flies talking. Yeah, you remember Warsaw? What a feast we had. We were so full of crap we couldn't fly. Flies. And I cried. I cried for no reason. In the nighttime, the colossal, huge, giant, black, flame-throwing jackboots would trample through my dreams. Side note, many survivors of the Holocaust, this would be a problem for the rest of their lives. Many of them relived their trauma at night in their dreams. Misha, Jack, also experiences the same thing. Finally, Vivian, she had had enough of me. And as she was leaving, I stared at her stomach. Are you pregnant? I had asked her. Goodbye, she said. She closed the door. And I went back to the street corners. You remember the day you were hurrying by with your briefcase or your shopping bag and you were heading for the parking lot? And you saw a one-eared, pint-sized, Looney Tune nut job ranting on a corner? That was me. I was flapping my jaws day after day about Oleg and Yuri and Himmler and the chicken and Kuba the clown and the crows and the black pearls and my yellow stone and the food that flew over the wall and the flaming flying cow and the orphans marching and singing and the man who scrubbed the sidewalk with his beard and Buffo's belly and Dr. Gorchak's crazy goatee and the ladies with white gloves and cameras and Greta the horse that never was. All of these things were a jumble stuck in my head. Oh my goodness, what a mess they must have been coming out of my mouth. And you were the thing that gave me shape. But I wasn't even listening, you might say. I don't even remember you. Don't feel bad. The important thing was not that you listened, but that I talked. I can see that now. I was born into craziness. When the whole world turned crazy, I was ready for it. That's how I survived. And when the craziness was over, where did that leave me? On the street corner, that's where, running my mouth, spilling myself. And I needed you there to listen to me. You were the bottle that I poured myself into. Well, from there, I branched out. I went to nearby towns that had never seen a street corner talker like me. I went to Norristown, Conshohocken, Glenside. And the years and the words went by, and the years and the words went by. Side note, he has spent his life as a homeless man, ranting and raving on corners of Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And then one day, in Philadelphia, in the shadows of City Hall, two women, they stopped and they listened. These ladies looked to be in their 70s. They wore wide hats that shaded their faces like little parasols, and after a while, one of them reached out her hand and she cupped my ear clump. She smiled at me and she nodded and she said, "We hear you. It is enough now. It is over." They walked on, and I went another way, and I never spoke on another corner again. Side note, these two old ladies were most likely survivors of the camps, and they know exactly what he is talking about. So at this point in our story, Misha, Jack, is an old man, probably in his mid 60s to mid 70s. When my daughter found me, I was stocking shelves in a Big and Go market. So before I begin chapter 45, he's come to America. He's had some serious mental issues. He has spent most of his life as a homeless man, rambling on about nothing, or so we thought, on a street corner. And we fast forward to his 60s or 70s. He's obviously gotten some of his life together because he has a job now. Chapter 45 today. "Poppy Noodle, Poppy Noodle!" That's my granddaughter. She screams from another room, and I get up from my easy chair and I go see what is it this time. "Look at me, Poppy Noodle!" I'm looking. She thinks she's standing on her head. But the toes of her pink sneakers never leave the floor, and I am once again reminded of the girl whose name she carries. Janina. I was putting up soup cans in aisle 4. Passage of time, by the way. I was putting up soup cans in aisle 4 when I heard the voice behind me. Mr. Milgram?" I turned around. It was a young woman in a light blue skirt and a windbreaker, and she had dark brown hair. She was holding the hand of a little girl, and the little girl looked up at me with huge unblinking eyes. Then the young woman said to me, "Daddy?" I just stared. "My name is Catherine. I'm your daughter. I've been looking for you forever." She shifted the little girl to stand in front of her. "And this is my daughter. Her name is Wendy. She's your granddaughter." "I'm 4, said the little girl. "What happened to your ear?" "Wendy," said her mother. A distant voice that only I could hear replied, "It was shot off twice. First by a jackboot, and then by Yuri." "Did you know you're my grandfather?" I still could not speak. "Well, you are. Shake." She held out her hand and I held out mine, and she took it and she gave it a good shake. "Pleased to meet you." I looked at her mother. "You didn't know about me, did you, Daddy?" she said. I wasn't sure." Her smile was radiant. "Well, I'm here. I'm 25 years old now. I know about you from Mother. For 4 years now, I've been saving something for you." "Yes?" I hesitated. "My daughter Wendy's middle name. I left it blank, and I knew someday I would find you. She's been waiting 4 years for a middle name. I want you to give it to her. Janina." My daughter's laughter rang through the market. "Well, I thought you were going to at least take a minute to think about it." She took the little girl's face in her hand and she turned it towards herself and she said, "Wendy Janina, it is." The little girl clapped and she twirled about. "Wendy Janina, Wendy Janina." "We live in Elkins Park," she said. "We have a spare room. You can have it and your own bathroom." I dropped my apron in aisle 4 and they took me home. Wendy Janina tries to improve her headstand, and she pushes off from her toes a little too hard, which sends her tiny body sailing past a handstand and onto a back flop onto the hard floor. Oof! I wince at the thump, and from the floor her eyes cast about until they find me. Her lower lip sticks out. She is deciding whether or not to cry. Secretly, I hope she does cry. I want to be the grandfather who stops her tears. And I hold out my arms, and she gets up and she comes to me, and I lift her up to my lap, and she puts her head on my chest. She doesn't cry, but it's enough. I would like to stay this way for a year or 10, but she leaps from my lap and she pipes, "Outside!" She grabs my finger and pulls me out to the deck. "I'll sit here," I say to her, and I settle into the rocking chair. "Watch me," Wendy says, and she runs to the swing set. I watch. She swings back and forth. The maple tree behind her is a brilliant orange. The year is gorgeous in its dying. The milkweed pods are bursting everywhere. The milkweed does not change colors. The milkweed is as green in October as it is in July. And when I said one day to my daughter Catherine, "Drive around out of town," and I brought along a trowel is like a shovel, and a bucket, she didn't ask why, and when I said, "Stop here," and I dug it up, she only said, "That's a milkweed, right?" I nodded. She didn't object when I planted it at the end of the yard, away from the maple tree, because angel plants must have sun. My daughter does not pester me with questions. She knows everything that I told her mother, which means she knows everything about me. But Janina, all those years of talking and all those street corners, I kept Janina, my sister, to myself. One time Catherine said to me, "Are you ever going to tell me why you named her Janina?" "Someday," I said. "Someday." Side note, to talk of Janina was probably too traumatic for him to do, even as an old man. The last paragraph. At last, Wendy Janina tires of the swing. Or maybe she just wants a ride on the rocker with me doing the work. And she plops down on my lap and says, "Rock me, Poppy Noodle." I rock. I smile. And I close my eyes. I think of all the voices that have told me who I was, who I have been, the names that I have been called. They called me thief, stupid. They called me gypsy. They called me Jew. They called me one-eared Jack. I don't care. Empty-handed victims, the bread ladies, once told me who I was, stop thief. And then Yuri told me who I was, Misha. And then an armband told me who I was, Jew. And then an immigration officer told me who I was. And now this little girl in my lap, this little girl whose call silences the tramping jackboots in my dreams. It's her voice that silences the nightmares. It's her voice will be the last to tell me who I am. I was, but now I am. I am Poppy Noodle. The end. Thank you, Jerry Spinelli, for probably writing the greatest book I've ever read in my life.